I'm Danny Ehrlich with Christian Friends of Israeli Communities. Welcome to Tel Shiloh, Ancient Shiloh. We're here at Shiloh, also known as Shiloh. And Shiloh is the place where the tabernacle in the desert, the Mishkan, the dwelling place of God, if you will, amongst the children of Israel in the desert, when Joshua conquers the land over 3,000 years ago, the Mishkan, the tabernacle with the Ark of the Covenant, will be placed here at Shiloh. And if you look here at this map, this is a great map here at the site of Tel Shiloh, which is always an important place for Christian Friends of Israeli Community groups to visit when they're in Israel. You can see how the different tribes were distributed amongst the land. You can see down here, Judah, very important part of the country, with Jerusalem right over here on the map. Just north of Jerusalem, Benjamin. Just north of Benjamin, Ephraim. That's where we are now, in the territory of Ephraim. And north of that, Manasseh. The children of Rachel, Benjamin, Ephraim, and Manasseh. And just south of that, Judah. Now you can see Shiloh is a great choice of the place to put the tabernacle. Why? Because before David becomes king and conquers Jerusalem between Benjamin and Judah, this was the site that the tribes would gather in the three pilgrim festivals, on Passover, on Pentecost, and on Tabernacles. And look, it's right here in the middle of the country. You got Manasseh and Ephraim and Judah and Zebulun and the other part of Manasseh and Gad and Reuben, all the tribes coming here to the middle. And for hundreds of years, this will be the gathering place of the tribes of Israel until much later Jerusalem will become that place. But it starts here in Shiloh. So we come to Shiloh here to remember those early days here when the tribes of Israel conquered the land under Joshua, and where Shiloh is set up as that site where the tribes will gather and where people will come on pilgrimage. This is where Samuel the prophet will grow up under the tutelage of Eli the priest. And of course Samuel the prophet will be the one who will anoint David, who will then move the tabernacle to Jerusalem. We're going to learn the story here of the tabernacle in Shiloh and understand why this is such an important place, the place where God's presence dwelt for hundreds of years before Jerusalem became that place where God's name was associated and his presence was associated with. Okay, so now that we know where Shiloh is, we're going to go to what's left of Shiloh, and see the place where the tabernacle stood for hundreds of years. When we come here to Shiloh, it's a tale of great heights, it's a tale of great depths. It's a tale of great success and spiritual connection to God, and it's a tale of sin and punishment. It's a tale of exile, and it's a tale of return. First of all, if we look around us, we can see we're here at the ancient city of Shiloh. And if we go back to the Bible, to the text, Joshua chapter 18, and the whole community of the Israelite people assembled at Shiloh and set up the tent of the meeting there. The tabernacle was set up here at Shiloh. And we'll try to figure out if we can see where would it have been set up. But here we can see the entrances to the city. You see, we're coming down into the valley. Ancient cities would be built up on a hill. We can see here we have a slope that goes up. Why are you going to build on a hill? You want the security. You want to be able to see your enemies coming. And if your enemies do come towards you, you want to have walls that will protect you down below. And then the enemy has to fight its way up into the city. So here we can see some of the walls of the city of Shiloh. We're talking here more than 3,000 years ago, back to the time of Joshua. You can see some of the houses down beneath here, some of the remnants of the houses here. There's been some amazing archaeological work done here. Now, so Shiloh begins as that place where we're told in the book of Joshua that the children of Israel will gather and set up the tent of the meeting, set up the tabernacle. we fast forward to the book of Samuel, the beginning of Samuel. And while the story has progressed, we're a few hundred years later. The tribes of Israel have established themselves in the land, each tribe doing its own thing, so to speak. This is the period before the kings, before Saul, before David had been chosen by God to be kings. This is the period of the judges, where every tribe has its own tribal leader that we know as the Shoftim, or the judges. And frankly, the country's in a bit of a mess, because we have 13 different tribes of Israel, 12 of whom have a portion of the land. Of course, the tribe of Levi is scattered amongst the other tribes. And each tribe, rather than uniting together, is busy pursuing its own agenda. But Shiloh is supposed to be that place where each tribe can still come together, all the tribes can still come together on the pilgrim festivals, on Passover, on Pentecost, and on Tabernacle. Now, it's not clear from the text if people continue to do that. The implication is that as the years went on, people got lax in fulfilling their requirements as God commanded. But we're told in the first chapter of Samuel of a man of Ephraim by the name of Elkanah, who lives in Ephraim, and his two wives, Peninnah and Hannah, who comes faithfully and religiously here to the site of Shiloh, the site where God's presence can be felt here on earth, and who at this time, when Elkanah comes with his wife Peninnah and Hannah to Shiloh, who is presiding here? We don't have a prophet presiding here. We have a priest, a Kohen, Eli the priest, and we have his two sons, Hophni and Pinchas. Hophni and Pinchas, priestly names that repeat over the generations, and we'll learn more about them then. Things are not going so well. Eli is getting old, and his leadership is not strong. His two sons, Hophni and Pinchas, the Bible tells us, are corrupt, and they're corrupting the people, and people stop coming. But Elkanah still faithfully comes. And we're told, of course, the story of Elkanah coming here to Shiloh. We can imagine him coming in through the city here, coming up the road in this direction, heading towards the side of the tabernacle. And when we get to the site where we think the tabernacle is, we'll learn a little bit about his wife Hannah, who is desperate for a son. She wants to have a child. She's unable to have a child. Peninnah, Elkanah's other wife, has children. Hannah does not have children. She is barren. And of course, we know this is a biblical paradigm. We have it over and over again. Sarah is barren. She needs divine intervention to give birth to Isaac. Rebecca is barren, and she needs divine intervention to give birth. And of course, Rachel is barren and needs divine intervention to give birth. And Joseph and Benjamin are her children. And here we are in Ephraim, the tribe of Ephraim, the grandson of Rachel, Joseph's son, Ephraim. This is the biblical area of this tribe of Ephraim. So it's very fitting that Hannah also comes to this place with a prayer for a child, which is answered by God, and that will produce Samuel the prophet, who will then go on to anoint the kings of Israel, Saul, and then David, and then the Davidic line that comes from him. And we get to another story, though. We're going to jump ahead and come back to the story of the prayer of Hannah, because we get a story in between, or a story that happens before, if you will. After Hannah prays here, and we'll get to her prayer when we're at the tabernacle, and her son Samuel is born to her, she has promised God that if you give me a son, I will dedicate him to your service. And when he's about 3 years old, she brings him back here to the tabernacle. And things have gotten really bad here now. And the Philistines, the Greek-speaking people along the coast, you can see the sun. So it'll be as it's late in the afternoon now, towards the west, towards the Mediterranean, over the mountains of Samaria that we see here, are attacking the tribes of Israel. And the mountain people of Israel, the tribes here, go down to the coast to meet them in battle, to stop them from breaking through. And the sons of Eli, Hophni and Pinchas, misunderstand what God wants here, and misunderstand what does it mean to have God's presence as it's represented by the Ark of Covenant, and they take the Ark of the Covenant with them to battle, as if it's some sort of magical kind of talisman that will win the war for them. And now you can imagine that you're here in the city of Shiloh with high walls, which we can't see today. You're here in Shiloh. The army has marched out. The sons of Eli with the Ark of the Covenant have gone off to the war. And people here are waiting. It's quiet. They're waiting to hear what happens in the battle over by the coast. And then the Bible tells us, as they're watching and waiting, and they're looking in that direction, over the mountains. There's a mountain pass just over there to the east. To the west, just over there to the west. And suddenly they see somebody running. And the Bible tells us he doesn't look very good. He doesn't look like a runner coming from a victorious army. We're told he's a Benjaminite. And you can imagine, as the people here are standing on the city walls here, and they can looking down to the valley that we're looking at right now, they see the runner coming. And as he gets closer and closer, they can see he's not looking very good. This can't be good news. And he comes in, and you can see down here where the modern steps are, right down to our right. He comes through the city gates, and he says, I must get to Eli the priest up at the Tabernacle. And he runs up through the streets, and you can imagine the panic of the people behind as they run up through the streets, and he gets to Eli the priest on the other side, standing in front of the Tabernacle. And he has the terrible news that we have in the book of Samuel, that the Philistines have beaten the army of Israel. That the sons of Eli, Hophni and Pinchas, have been killed in the battle. Eli the priest heard that, could handle it, but then came the worst news of all, that the Ark of the Covenant has been captured by the Philistines. At that moment, Eli the priest he dies. It's too much for him to handle. And you can imagine the panic in the streets. And as far as we can tell, the Philistine army will come in here right behind the runner, and the city is burnt and destroyed, and never really returns to its former glory as that site of the presence of God among the tribes of Israel. It will later on be eclipsed by Jerusalem to the south, but we had this idea that wherever the presence of God was, wherever the Shekhinah, if you will, that aspect of God that we human beings can connect to and relate to, wherever it once was, it somehow lingers there. So when we go to Jerusalem, to the Temple Mount, we can feel that. And yes, when we come here to Shiloh, we can feel that lingering of hundreds of years. This was the nexus point where mortals could meet the divine presence here in Shiloh. So we're going to walk now up into Shiloh. We're going to get to the very top of the hill. We're going to get to that point where Eli would have been waiting for news of the war, news of his sons, news of the of the Ark of the Covenant. And then we'll look down at the site where the tabernacle stood, and we'll also examine the prayer of Hannah that she offered as she came to the tabernacle. We come here to the site where the tabernacle stood for hundreds of years, before the kings in Jerusalem, before Saul, before David. How can we know this? Nobody left a sign from over 3,000 years ago that said the tabernacle was here. Well, we have a few ways that we can know this. For one thing, just in front of me, we have the highest point of the city of Shiloh. And that would be one place where we might want to look for a tabernacle. You put holy places in high places, but it doesn't work for a few reasons. So today we have the audiovisual center up there. The top of the hill is too small. This is a place where millions of the people of the tribes of Israel have to come on the pilgrim festivals. There needs to be a large space here for having a place of sacrifice, having a place where families could camp out. Now, we have a few other clues here along the way. What do we find in the archaeology here as we get to this side of the Tel? We find ritual baths. And we know that before you go to sacrifice in the tabernacle, later on in the temple in Jerusalem, you must be ritually clean. So the importance of having the ritual baths here, the mikvaot in Hebrew, that's a clue that helps us understand we're approaching something of holiness. And again, we're in Shiloh. We know what the thing of holiness was, the place of the tabernacle. But more than that, in those hundreds of years when Shiloh served as the place of pilgrimage for the tribes of Israel, the one central place, we didn't have a political capital yet. We weren't united as tribes. Each tribe was doing its own thing. We had a religious capital. And on Passover, for example, we know that all the houses of Israel, all the households of Israel would come here to Shiloh. We have a written text that tell us about this. Would come here to Shiloh and camp on the hills all around. And that's another thing that tells us that this plateau is the place for it. Because you can camp over here, if you look to the right where we see the modern Shiloh of today, you can camp up on the hills just to our north on the other side of the plateau. You can camp on the hills to the west, to our left over here, and still see the plateau. Now, why is it important to see the plateau? Because we're told that you must see the place where the Passover sacrifice is made. And when each family would sit and eat it, the precursor to our modern Seder that we've been doing for the last 2,000 years or so, here we're talking more than 3,000 years ago, but as each family would sit to eat the Passover sacrifice, they would need to see the place. And if you look at the topography here, this is the place that can be seen from everywhere. This is too high up. So it needs to be down here and make sense, everything will be fine. Furthermore, in the archaeology here, we find shards of pottery going up each of the hills here, each of the directions, north and east, and east and west. Going up, we find pottery shards, and yet as you crest the hills, the pottery shards begin to disappear. There's almost nothing there. And so again, that tells us that people were camped out here in huge numbers, where they could see this plateau, not further on where they couldn't see the plateau. So this helps us identify the site as well. So when we come here Christian Friends of Israeli Communities, there's a few things we want to experience here. We want to stand in the place where God's presence was felt here by generations and generations, from the time of Joshua till down to the time of Samuel. We want to see how the children of Israel have come back and rebuilt the ancient cities which were destroyed as God told us. There would be destruction, there would be return. And when we come here as a group, we'll try to do this together and see if we can just take a few minutes and feel God's presence. As we know, God's presence is all around us. All we have to do is open our souls, open our hearts, and feel it. And this is definitely one of those places where we take a moment and try to hear everyone as it comes through here. Hear God's presence and feel God's presence, but not that much work we can do it, because that place, centuries of people coming to seek God here, like Hannah did. She prays here and says, I want a son. And if you give me a son, I will dedicate him to it. Her prayer becomes the model that the rabbis have taken for how prayer should be. And if you'll go with me to Samuel 1, in her wretchedness, she prayed to the Lord, weeping all the while. And she made the vow, O Lord of hosts, if you will look upon the suffering of your maidservant and will remember me and not forget your maidservant, and if you will grant your maidservant a male child, I will dedicate him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor shall ever touch his head, will become a Nazarite. And she kept on praying before the Lord. Now, it's a simple prayer. It's not great poetry. There's no music in the background. There's no choir going. It comes from the heart. And the rabbis have told us over the generations, you really want to pray. That's how you pray. Pray from the heart. Feel God's presence. Connect to God's presence. And recognize that God doesn't have to do what you want him to do. God's plan will be God's plan. What we can pray for is to connect to God's plan, and that which our heart desires will be pleasing to the Lord. And in this case it was. And of course Samuel will be the issue, will come from this prayer that is answered by God, and Samuel will become the one who will then anoint the kings of Israel 3,000 years ago, and leads us to King David, King Solomon, the entire Davidic line, perhaps to this day.
I hope you enjoyed that video, and we'd like to be sure you're getting all of our video content. So just click on the subscribe button below as well as on the notification bell, and that way you will have easy access to all our material. We look forward to staying in touch with you. God bless you, and have a wonderful day.